Hey guys, this is Refugee Part 15. We're going to start out with Yosef. They had left his father behind in Cuba, and then the boat was going to try to dock in America, and the US would not let them, so they had to go back to Europe. So this is somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean in 1939, 22 days from home. Yosef watched his sister splashing around happily in the swimming pool on A deck. Other kids chased each other around the promenade, watched movies, play shuffleboard. For as much as he wanted to grow up, Yosef wished now that he could join them and be a little kid again, cheerfully oblivious to what was going on around him. But he wasn't a kid anymore. He had responsibilities, like keeping his sister and his mother safe. Papa had told him what concentration camps were like. He couldn't let that happen to Ruthie and his mother. Are you ready? It was Posner. He stood in the shadow of the smokestack, looking around nervously. Okay, so remember this guy Posner approached Yosef and said that they wanted to take over the ship to make sure they didn't end up back in Germany. Yosef nodded. He had agreed to help take over the ship. He had to do something, and this was the only thing he could do. What about Schneider and his firemen? Yosef asked as they walked. We've got a distraction for them down on D-deck, but we have to move fast. The rest of the group came together near the social hall. There were 10 men, including Yosef, and they all carried metal candlesticks and pieces of pipe. Some of the men were Papa's age, like Posner, and some of them were in their 20s. Yosef was by far the youngest. 10 men, Yosef thought. A minyan. 10 Jews come together not to worship, but to mutiny. Posner put a small length of lead pipe in Yosef's hand, and suddenly the weight of what Yosef was about to do was very real. Lead on, Posner said. Yosef took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. He led his fellow mutineers into the maze of crew corridors. Just outside the bridge, in the chart room, where the maps were stored, they came across Ostermeyer, the first officer. He looked up from the map cabinet with surprise, but before he could do anything, Posner and one of the other men grabbed him and pushed him through the door to the bridge. Yosef was startled by how rough they were being with Ostermeyer, but he had tried to swallow his fear. Taking over the ship wasn't going to be easy, but this was only the start. There weren't as many people on the bridge as there had been when Yosef visited, just one officer and 3 sailors. The sailor at the ship's helm saw them first, and he let go of the steering wheel to dive for an alarm. One of the passengers got to him first, slamming into the helmsman and sending him tumbling to the floor. The mutineers quickly surrounded the other sailors, threatening them with their makeshift clubs. And they had done it. Just like that, they had taken the bridge. Yosef's heart raced as he looked around, wondering what was next. Stretched out before them was the great green-blue Atlantic Ocean, and beyond that, still days away, Germany and the Nazis. Up on the little platform in the back of the room, the steering wheel teetered back and forth, and Yosef wondered crazily if he should jump up there and turn the ship around himself. Send for the captain, Posner told the first officer. Warily, Ostermeyer went to the ship's intercom and summoned Captain Schroeder to the bridge. As soon as Captain Schroeder stepped onto the bridge, he understood what was happening. He spun to leave, but Yosef and one other man blocked his exit. Who's in charge here? Captain Schroeder said. What do you mean by all of this? Posner stepped forward. We mean to save our lives by taking over the ship, he said, and sailing it to any other country but Germany. Captain Schroeder put his hands behind his back and walked to the middle of the bridge. He looked out at the ocean, not at Posner. The other passengers will not support you, and my crew will overpower you, he said matter-of-factly. All you are doing is laying yourselves open to a charge of piracy. Posner and the others looked around at each other nervously. Yosef couldn't believe they were so easily losing their resolve. Let me just fix this. Much better. We will hold you here as hostages, Yosef said. They'll have to do it as we say. Even Yosef was surprised he'd spoken up. But his words seemed to put a little more steel back in the mutineers' resolve. Captain Schroeder turned to look at Yosef. The crew will obey only me, he said calmly, and I will give no order, no matter what you do, that will take my ship off its set course. And without that order, you can do nothing. What will you do, pilot the ship yourself? Yosef flushed and stared at the ground, remembering his crazy urge to take the wheel when he didn't even know how it worked or where to go. Captain Schroeder helped his fallen helmsman back to his feet and led him to the steering wheel. The man was still shaken from the attack, but he took the helm and straightened the ship on course. You have done enough already for me to put serious charges against you, Captain Schroeder said, though frustratingly even keel. If I do, I can assure you that you will most certainly be taken back to Germany, and you know what that means. Yosef steamed. He didn't know what that meant, but did Captain Schroeder know? Really know? How many Germans really understood what was happening in the concentration camps? Yusuf knew because his papa had told him, had shown him when he had jumped overboard and tried to kill himself. Yusuf wasn't about to let his mother and sister end up in one of those camps. You would do that to us? One of the men asked the captain. You are doing it to yourselves, Schroeder said. Listen, I understand and I sympathize with your desperation. Posner huffed. You have no idea what we've been through, any of us. Captain Schroeder nodded. No, you're right. But no matter what's been done to you, what you're doing now is a real criminal act. By law, I should have thrown you all in the brig, but I'm willing to overlook all of this if you leave the bridge right now and give me your word that you will take no such further action. Yusuf scanned the faces of his co-conspirators and saw only panic and fear. Surrender. No, Yusuf told them. No, he told the Captain Schroeder. My father told me what happened to him in those camps. I can't let that happen to my mother and little sister. We can't go back to Germany. The first officer took that moment to try to pull free from the men holding him. There was a struggle. The other sailors moved to help him, and the other mutineers flinched, ready to fight. Ostermeyer, no, Captain Schroeder commanded. Cease and desist. That's an order. The first officer froze, and Posner froze too, and the lead pipe in his hand still raised in threat. Nobody moved. The captain raised his hand. I promise you, men, he said, quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I promise you, on my honor as a sea captain, that I will do everything possible to land you in England. I will run the ship aground there if I must, but you must stand down and promise me no further trouble. Posner lowered his pipe. Agreed, he said. No, no. Yusuf wanted to argue, but everyone else agreed. Yusuf threw his pipe to the ground and left without the other men. They were going back to Europe, and there was nothing he could do about it. And now we're on to Isabel, and she is off the coast of Florida in 1994, 5 days from home. So the boat was almost sinking, and they had to put the engine overboard. Ivan had died, which was really sad, and her mom's in labor. And then they finally saw the lights of Miami. So exciting. They were getting closer, and then the Coast Guard stopped them and was going to take them back to Cuba. They were going back to Cuba, and there was nothing any of them could do about it. So this was the last verse, Isabel thought. After everything they'd been through, after everything they'd lost, their climatic ending wasn't to be climatic after all. There wasn't a son cubano with its triumphant finale. Theirs was a fugue, a musical theme that was repeated again and again without resolution. Their coda was to be forever homeless, and when returned to their own home, forever refugees in their own land. The U.S. Coast Guard had found them. Geraldo, Isabel's mother said, but Poppy didn't answer. He sat frozen with all the others in the bright white searchlights they had clicked on. A ship motor, a real motor attached to a real propeller, roared to life. Geraldo, Mommy said again. It started. No, he said, it's over for all of us. They're going to take us to Guantanamo. The searchlight swung around toward them. No, Mommy said, her hands on her bulging stomach, her voice tinged in alarm. No, I mean it started. The baby's coming. The head of every single person in the little boat turned in surprise. Isabel sat down with a splash in the water. She didn't know what to think, how to feel. She'd been put through the ringer, the elation of leaving Cuba, the exhaustion of the storm, the horror of Ivan's death, and the relief of seeing the lights of Miami. The despair of running into the Coast Guard ship and knowing they would never get to El Norte. And now her mother was having a baby. Isabel's baby brother. Isabel could only sit lifelessly and stare. She had nothing left to give. I'm not staying in that refugee camp at Guantanamo behind a barbed wire fence, Lito said. That's just treating one prison for another. I'll go back to Cuba, back to my home. Castro said he wouldn't punish anyone who tried to leave, unless he's changed his mind again, Amara said. It was Luis who saw the Coast Guard searchlight sweep past him on the water and point somewhere else. Maybe none of us will have to go to Guantanamo, Luis said. Look, they're not after us. The Coast Guard is after someone else. Isabel watched as the searchlight found another craft on the water several hundred meters away. It was a raft full of refugees like them. More Cubans? Amara asked. It doesn't matter, Senor Castillo said. Now's your chance. Paddle for shore. Quickly. Isabel spared her mother a look, then grabbed a water jug carved into a scoop and started rowing as hard as she could. So did Lito, Amaro, and the Castillos. But be quiet, Luis whispered. Sound carries a long way in the water. Oh! Isabel's mother cried. Shh, Teresa, Poppy said, holding her hand. Don't have the baby yet. Wait till we get to Florida. Isabel's mother gritted her teeth and nodded, tears welling in her eyes. The lights of Miami got closer, but they were still so far away. Isabel glanced behind her. In the darkness, she could pick out the lights of the Coast Guard ship alongside another dark craft. Shadowy figures were moving back and forth between the two. They were taking the refugees on board and to send them back to Cuba. Oh, Isabel's mother cried, her voice like a cannon shot through the quiet. quiet. Row, row, Senor Costello whispered. They were so close. Isabel could see which hotel rooms had their lights on and which were off, and could hear bongos beating out a rhythm over the water, a rumba. The current's taking us north, Louise whispered. We're going to miss it. It doesn't matter. As long as we're standing on land, we're safe. Lito said, his voice thin from exertion. We just can't be caught in the water. Row! Oh! Isabel's mother screamed, her voice booming out across the water. Breep, breep! The Coast Guard cutter made the same sound as before, and its searchlight lit upon their little boat. They had found them. No, Isabel's mother sobbed. No, I want to have my baby in El Norte. Row! Senor Castillo yelled, giving up entirely and being quiet. Behind them, the Coast Guard cutter's motor roared to life. Isabel churned at the water, bending her flimsy jug paddle in her desperation. Tears streamed down her face from sorrow or fear or exhaustion she didn't know. All she knew was that they were still too far from the shore. The Coast Guard ship was going to catch them before they reached land. And now we're on to Mahmoud, who's in Hungary. So last time with Mahmoud, remember they had been held up by their taxi driver, and they finally made it to the border of Hungary, and they tried to cross the border, like Hungary was building a fence. So they tried to cross the border with other refugees, and then soldiers showed up. So this is Mahmoud in Hungary in 2015, 16 days from home. This is kind of a long section. Sirens, soldiers shouting through bullhorns, screams, explosions. Mahmoud was barely aware of everything that was happening around him. He lay on the ground, curled into a ball, trying desperately to draw a breath that would not come. His eyes felt like bees had stung them. Oh yeah, there was tear gas, remember? And his nose was a streaming cauldron of burning chemicals. He made a choking, gurgling sound that was somewhere between a shriek and a whimper. After everything, he was going to die here, on the border between Serbia and Hungary. Rough hands pulled Mahmoud from the ground and dragged him away, his sneakers twisting and scraping on the dirt road. He still couldn't see a thing, couldn't force his eyes to open, but he felt his chest beginning to work again, and the barest tendrils of air reaching his lungs. He drank the air greedily. Then he was thrown to the ground, and someone pulled his hands behind him and tied them together with a thin piece of plastic. It cinched painfully tight. Mahmoud was lifted again and rolled onto the flat metal bed of a truck. He lay there, still gasping for breath, the plastic zip tie cutting angrily into his wrists as more people were tossed into the truck beside him. Then Mahmoud heard the truck's doors slam and the engine start, and they were moving. Mahmoud's breathing finally came back to something like normal, and he was able to sit up and open his bleary eyes. There were no windows in the van, and it was dark, but Mahmoud was able to see the other 9 men with him, all of them red-eyed and crying and coughing from the tear gas, all of them handcuffed with zip ties, including Mahmoud's father. Dad! Mahmoud cried. He worked his way across the floor of the bouncing van on his knees and fell into his father. They put their heads together. Where are Mom and Waleed? Mahmoud asked. I don't know. I lost them in the chaos, Dad said. His eyes were red-ringed, and his face was wet from tears and snot. He looked terrible. Mahmoud realized he must look just as bad. Mahmoud thought the van should stop soon, but it drove on and on. Where do you think you're going? Mahmoud asked. Where do you think we're going? Mahmoud asked. I don't know. I can't reach my phone, Dad said. But we've been in this van for a long time. Maybe they're taking us to Austria. No, one of the other men said. They're taking us to prison. Prison? For what? Mahmoud wondered. We're just refugees. We haven't done anything wrong. The van stopped, and Mahmoud and the other refugees were unloaded into a building one of the soldiers called an immigration detention center. But Mahmoud could tell it was really a prison. It was a long, single-story building with a barbed wire fence surrounding it, guarded by Hungarian soldiers with automatic rifles. A soldier cut the zip tie off of Mahmoud's wrist. Mahmoud expected the relief to be instant. But instead, his hands went from numb to being on fire, like tingling needles he felt in his leg after it fell asleep, times 1,000. He cried out in pain, hands shaking, as he and his father were hurried into a cell with cinder block walls on 3 sides and metal bars on the front. 8 other men were pushed inside with them. Up and down the hall, more prison cells were filled with refugees. A soldier slammed the barred door shut, and it locked with an electronic bolt. We're not criminals, one of the other men in the cell yelled at him. We didn't ask for civil war. We didn't want to leave our homes, another man yelled. We're refugees, Mahmoud yelled, unable to stay silent any longer. We need help. The soldier ignored them and walked away. Mahmoud felt helpless all over again, and he kicked the bars in anger. There were similar cries of innocence and rage from the other cells, but soon they were overtaken by separated families trying to find each other without being able to see from cell to cell. Fatima, Waleed? Mahmoud's father called, and Mahmoud yelled their names with him. but if his mother and brother were here, they didn't answer. We'll find them, Dad assured Mahmoud, but Mahmoud didn't understand how his father could be so sure. They hadn't found Hana, so what made him think they would find Mom and Waleed? What if they had lost them forever? Mahmoud was beside himself. This trip, this odyssey, was pulling his family apart, stripping them away like leaves from the trees in the fall. It was all he could do not to panic. His breath came quick and his heart hammered in his chest. I don't believe it. They took us almost all the way to Austria, Mahmoud's father said, checking his iPhone at last. It's just another hour by car. We're outside a little town in the north of Hungary called Gruyere. Almost all the way to Austria, Mahmoud thought. And instead of helping them along, the Hungarians had thrown them in prison. Hours passed, and Mahmoud went from panic to frustration to despair. They sat in the cell without food or water, and only one metal toilet attached to the wall. All Mahmoud could think about was Mom and Waleed. Were they in some Hungarian prison somewhere too, or had they been pushed back across the border into Serbia? How would he and his dad ever find them again? He slumped against the wall. I have to say, this is the worst hotel I've ever stayed in, Dad said. He was trying to joke again. His father was always joking, but Mahmoud didn't think that any of this was funny at all. At last the soldiers with nightsticks came to their cell and told them in Arabic to line up to be processed. We don't want to be processed, Dad said. We just want to get to Austria. Why not take us all the way to the border? We never want to stay in Hungary anyway. A soldier whacked him on the back with his nightstick, and Mahmoud's father collapsed to the ground. We don't want your filth here either. The guard yelled in Arabic, you're all parasites. He kicked Mahmoud's father in the back, and another soldier hit Mahmoud's father again and again with his stick. No, Mahmoud cried. No, don't stop. Mahmoud begged. He couldn't bear to see his father beaten, but what could he do? We'll do it. We'll be processed, Mahmoud told the guards. That's all it took. Surrender. The guard stopped beating his father and ordered everyone to line up. Mahmoud helped his father to his feet. Dad leaned heavily against him, needing his son for support. Together they shuffled in line along the far side of the hallway, away from the cells. Men and women and children watched them with hopeful eyes as they passed, looking for their husbands and brothers and sons. Then Mahmoud saw them, his mother and Waleed. They were in a cell with other women and children. Yusuf! Mahmoud! Mahmoud's mother cried. Fatima! Mahmoud's father cried with relief, and he stepped toward her. Whack! The soldier clubbed Mahmoud's father with his nightstick, and Dad went down again in a heap. Mahmoud and his father cried out at the same time. Stay in line, the soldier yelled. Mahmoud's mother reached for them through the bars. Yusuf, she cried. No, Mom, don't, Mahmoud cried. The soldier clanged his nightstick against the metal bars, and she retreated inside her cell. Mahmoud got his father up again and helped him into what the soldiers called the processing center. There, clerks sat behind long tables taking down information from the refugees. When Mahmoud and his father got to the front of the line, a man in a blue uniform asked them if they wanted to claim asylum in Hungary. Stay here, in Hungary, after you have beaten me, locked my family up like common criminals? Mahmoud's father asked, fists clenched and shaking. Mahmoud still had to help him to stand. Are you joking? Why can't you just let us go to Austria? Why do we need to be processed? We don't want to stay here 1 second longer than we have to. The policeman shrugged. I'm just doing my job. Mahmoud's father slammed his hand flat on the table, making Mahmoud jump. I wouldn't live in this awful country even if it was made out of gold. The policeman filled in an answer on a form. Then you will be sent back to Serbia, he said without looking up at him. And if you return to Hungary, you will be arrested. Mahmoud's father didn't speak again, not even to make a joke. Mahmoud answered the rest of the clerk's questions about their names and birth dates and places of birth, and then helped his father back to their cell with the other inmates. Mahmoud's mother cried out for them again as they passed, but Mahmoud's father didn't acknowledge her, and Mahmoud didn't respond. He knew that would only bring down the wrath of the guards again. Head down, hoodie up, eyes on the ground. Be unimportant, blend in, disappear. That was how you avoided bullies. End of part 15. This was read with permission by Scholastic.